In the dense pine forest, where the air is imbued with the scent of pine needles and dampness, a sound echoes that cannot be mistaken for anything else. It is not the rustle of wind in the treetops, nor the singing of birds, nor the hum of a distant highway. It is a rhythmic, relentless thud, resembling the beating of a huge, agitated heart. It emanates from beneath the earth. It penetrates the very consciousness, causing a chance traveler to freeze. This sound is the Salaspils metronome, an eternal pulse of memory that gives no peace to the living, reminding them of those who remained here forever. Here, amidst picturesque landscapes, under the Baltic sky, one of the darkest secrets of the 20th century was hidden, a secret that was revealed to the world only when the iron gates were flung open and the barbed wire was torn asunder by the tracks of liberating tanks. The silence that hung over Europe in those days was deceptive, for behind it lurked the roar of the approaching front. The calendar showed 1944, a time when the course of history was inexorably turning backwards. The previously invincible war machine, which had conquered half the world, was now retreating, leaving behind scorched earth and ruins. Soviet troops advanced westward, liberating city after city, village after village, but none of the soldiers, hardened in battles near Stalingrad and on the Kursk Bulge, could imagine what they would face on this land. War for them was understandable. There is an enemy. There is a front line. There are artillery duels and tank breakthroughs. But what was hidden in the rear of the retreating army did not fit into the framework of military logic. It was something beyond human comprehension of good and evil. The autumn of that year was cold and rainy, as if nature itself mourned what was happening on these lands. The land of Latvia, ravaged by occupation, was preparing to reveal its terrible secrets. The command of the advancing units received fragmented information from intelligence and local residents about strange objects surrounded by double and triple rows of barbed wire, watchtowers, and minefields. On maps, these places were often not marked or were disguised as warehouses and labor camps. But the truth that unfolded as the troops advanced was far more terrifying than any assumptions. The German command, realizing the inevitability of retreat, made frantic attempts to conceal the traces of their deeds. There was a special plan, a directive, prescribing the destruction of camp infrastructure and, most terribly, the elimination of all witnesses. The hasty evacuation carried out by the camp administration more resembled the chaotic flight of a criminal from a crime scene. Archives were burned, barracks were blown up, and prisoners who could still move were driven westward in marches that became the last for many. However, the scale of the system was such that it was physically impossible to conceal everything. Salaspils, located near Riga, became one of those places where the veil of secrecy was torn off most painfully and sharply. This place was not like an ordinary concentration camp, if the word ordinary is even applicable to such a phenomenon. Salaspils had its own special, monstrous specialization, which distinguished it even among other factories of suffering. When the advanced detachments of the Red Army approached the camp gates, they were met by an unnatural, ringing silence. The guards had fled, leaving the watchtowers empty and the gates wide open. The soldiers, accustomed to the roar of explosions and the whistle of bullets, entered the territory cautiously, expecting an ambush. But there was no enemy here. Instead of armed Wehrmacht soldiers, they were met by the empty eye sockets of barracks and the wind, chasing scraps of paper and old clothes across the parade ground. The first thing that caught the eye was not massive crematoria, as in Auschwitz, or gas chambers, as in Majdanek. Here, horror had a different appearance. It was hidden in details, in neatly stacked piles of things in children's toys trampled into the mud, in small shoes that would never be needed by their owners again. Salaspils was not just a place of confinement. In documents, it was often referred to as a, quote, one. But behind this bureaucratic euphemism lay a reality that made one's blood run cold. Thousands of people were brought here, political prisoners, partisans, but a special category consisted of civilians abducted from the occupied regions of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. And among them was a huge number of children. It was children who became the main victims and the main resource of this place. Here, a cynical, cold system of using human material was built. Children, torn from their mothers, became donors. Their blood, pure and healthy, was transfused into the veins of wounded German officers and soldiers. This was a conveyor belt where the life of one being was processed to prolong the life of another, according to an insane racial hierarchy. The soldiers who entered the barracks saw long rows of wooden bunks. The air was stale, heavy, permeated with the smell of sickness and hopelessness. On the walls, inscriptions could be discerned, made with charcoal or a fingernail. Names, dates, last messages to loved ones. These were cries for help, frozen in time. The liberators, many of whom were fathers themselves, could not hold back tears looking at the conditions in which the small prisoners were kept. Cold, hunger, lack of basic hygiene, and constant fear. This was the daily life of this place. The testimonies of survivors, which would later be documented by investigative commissions, painted a picture of absolute dehumanization. Mothers were separated from their children, and the screams of women losing their dearest echoed over the camp, drowning out the barking of guard dogs. The external conflict of this war was clear. Two ideologies, two armies, clashed in a deadly struggle. But here, behind the barbed wire, a conflict of a different nature unfolded. It was a clash of defenselessness with absolute, mechanized cruelty. The camp system was built to break the will, to turn a person into a number, into a statistical unit. And Salaspils was a vivid example of this system. The camp administration kept meticulous records. In documents later found, which they had not managed to destroy in the panic of retreat, there were columns for income and expenditure, as if it were not about people, but about firewood or coal. Loss due to natural causes. This is how death from exhaustion, disease, and unbearable labor was referred to in the reports. This bureaucratic sterility of the killer's language was perhaps one of the most terrifying discoveries for the investigators. However, beyond the external horror, there was also a deep internal layer of tragedy. It was the tragedy of choice, which prisoners faced, and the tragedy of transformation that the liberators experienced. The Soviet soldier, having traveled thousands of kilometers, having seen burned villages and destroyed cities, thought that his heart had hardened and nothing could surprise him anymore. But the sight of emaciated children whose hands resembled thin twigs and whose eyes were full of unchildlike wisdom and sorrow pierced even the thickest armor. In their memoirs and letters home, the soldiers wrote that it was in the camps that they finally understood who they were fighting. This was not just an enemy who had seized territory. It was a force that denied the very right to existence of entire peoples. The anger that gripped the soldiers was cold and resolute. The desire for retribution mixed with deep pity and a sense of guilt for not having arrived sooner. Parallel to the physical liberation, the process of comprehending the scale of what had happened began. Following the assault battalions, war correspondents, doctors, and special commissions to investigate Nazi crimes entered the camps. Their task was to record every fact, every name, every piece of evidence. It was a race against time, as traces were being destroyed not only by the Germans before their retreat, but also by nature itself. Rains washed away graves, winds scattered ashes. In the area of Salaspils and other Baltic camps, such as Kluga in Estonia, a horrifying picture of attempts to conceal evidence emerged. There was a special operation codenamed Action 1005, aimed at exhuming and burning the bodies of those who had died earlier. The Nazis understood that mass graves would be irrefutable proof of their guilt and literally tried to wipe their victims off the face of the earth, turning them into smoke and ashes. But the earth refused to keep these secrets. In the forests, pits full of remains were found. In the fields, traces of huge bonfires. In Kluga, the liberators saw terrifying wood piles, stacks of logs and bodies that had not finished burning. These images, filmed by frontline operators, circled the world, becoming visual proof of absolute evil. But the most difficult task was not to record the dead, but to save the living. The medical service of the Red Army faced a challenge for which no textbook had prepared them. People in the camps were brought to a state of extreme dystrophy. Their bodies had forgotten how to accept food. Ordinary bread or soup could become a deadly poison for them. Doctors literally had to reteach them how to live, fighting for every breath, for every heartbeat. Field hospitals were set up directly in the former barracks, which were cleaned of dirt and disinfected. The philosophical, ideological conflict exposed by the liberation of the camps was even deeper. The Age of Enlightenment, the belief in progress, humanism, and reason, all these pillars of European civilization collapsed before the gates of Salaspils, Majdanek, and Auschwitz. It turned out that a high level of technical development, a love for classical music and philosophy, are not an immunity against barbarism. On the contrary, Nazism put the achievements of civilization at the service of destruction. Gas chambers were an engineering project. The logistics of transporting people were calculated by mathematicians, and medical experiments were conducted by qualified doctors. This was a paradox that was incomprehensible. How could a nation that gave the world Goethe and Beethoven create a system of industrial death production? This question tormented not only philosophers, but also ordinary soldiers who looked at the neat German inscriptions on the camp equipment. Among those liberated in Salaspils were those who remembered the child donors. The stories of the survivors revealed details that took one's breath away. Children were selected based on external characteristics. The healthiest ones were sought out. They were kept in separate barracks, where the regime seemed softer, but the goal was one: to preserve the _quote _0_ until the moment of extraction. The blood collection procedure was carried out until the complete exhaustion of the small organism. Those who could no longer recover were disposed of. This was the quintessence of a utilitarian approach to man, taken to the absurd. Man was not viewed as an individual, but as a set of biological functions that could be used until their resource was fully depleted. This was the main horror of Nazi ideology, not in spontaneous cruelty, but in cold, rational methodicalness. The transformation of the perception of war occurred precisely in these days. If before the goal was victory over the enemy army, now the goal was the destruction of the ideology itself that had given rise to such camps. The war turned into a judgment, an act of supreme justice. Soviet soldiers no longer felt like mere warriors, but executors of history's verdict. They carried retribution on their bayonets, but not blind, but conscious. Each liberated camp added fury to the offensive. News of what the soldiers saw in Salaspils spread instantly along the front, passed from mouth to mouth, printed in battle leaflets. The slogan, "Kill the Fascist," was filled with a new concrete meaning. It meant stopping the death machine, saving those who were still alive. The culmination of this process was the discovery of the scale of the entire camp system. Salaspils was just one link in the chain. As they advanced westward into Poland and Germany, new death factories were uncovered. Treblinka, Sobibor, Buchenwald. But Salaspils remained in memory as a symbol of the tragedy of children. During the investigations, it was found that tens of thousands of people passed through this camp. Exact figures were extremely difficult to establish due to the destruction of archives, but the scale of child burials spoke for themselves. During excavations carried out immediately after the war, hundreds and thousands of child remains were found. These were not abstract figures, but concrete interrupted lives, unplayed games, unwritten books, unborn children of their own. The world was shocked when it learned of the Nazis' crimes. Photographs and newsreels from the liberated camps were shown at the Nuremberg trials. They became the strongest accusers. The defendants, sitting in the dock with interpreters' headphones, tried not to look at the screens where bulldozers scooped up bodies, where mountains of glasses and hair testified to the scale of robbery and murder. The defense tried to argue that these were excesses of the perpetrators, that the high command did not know the details. But documents found in the camp offices proved otherwise. Orders came from the very top. Reports were sent to Berlin. It was a state program that worked like clockwork. And it was in Salaspils, where children were killed for their blood, that this program showed its most disgusting face. The resonance of those years' events is still heard today. After the war, a memorial complex was created on the site of the Salaspils camp. The authors of the monument abandoned traditional heroic forms. There are no bronze soldiers with automatic rifles at the ready here. Stone and concrete reign here, gray, heavy, oppressive. Huge figures rising from the ground symbolize resilience and suffering. The unbroken, mother, the humiliated. But the strongest element of the memorial became the sound itself. A metronome is embedded in a concrete slab, beating the rhythm of a heart. This sound spreads over the forest day and night, winter and summer. It does not let one forget. It disturbs. It reminds. Tourists and school children who come here often fall silent as they step under the concrete beam on which the inscription is carved. Behind these gates, the earth groans. This is not a metaphor. The earth here is truly saturated with suffering. The lessons of Salaspils go far beyond the history of one war. It is a warning to all humanity about how easily one can cross the line of humanity if one allows an ideology of hatred to seize minds. Dehumanization does not begin with gas chambers. It begins with words, with dividing people into us and them, into useful and useless, into superior and inferior. Salaspils showed what man can do to man if moral constraints are removed and power is given. Today, as the world again faces conflicts and intolerance, the echo of the metronome sounds particularly relevant. It reminds us of the fragility of civilization and that the protection of human dignity is not a one-time act, but daily labor. In the first years after the war, the surviving children of Salaspils tried to find their parents. Newspapers and radio broadcast lists of names, descriptions, and photographs. It was an epic of search and hope. Some managed to find relatives, while others remained orphans, raised by the state or foster families. But the shadow of the camp stayed with them for life. The psychological trauma received in childhood did not disappear without a trace. Many of them flinched their whole lives from the barking of dogs or from sharp commands in German. Their memories became an important part of historical memory. They told how older children tried to care for younger ones, how they shared crumbs of bread, how they tried to keep at least a drop of warmth in the icy barracks. These stories of humanity in inhuman conditions became proof that the spirit is harder to break than the body. During excavations on the camp territory, not only remains but also personal belongings were found. A small doll without an arm, a rusty penknife, a coat button, a comb. These objects, seemingly war debris, became relics. They preserved the warmth of their owner's hands. Museum exhibitions, created based on these finds, affect visitors more strongly than volumes of statistics. When you see a small, worn-out shoe, you understand the scale of the tragedy more acutely than when you read the number 7,000 dead children. The personification of history through objects allows us, people of the 21st century, to touch that pain, to feel it on a physical level. One of the important aspects of the work after liberation was the legal qualification of crimes. The term genocide, which would later enter international law, was born precisely here, in the death fields of Eastern Europe. Lawyers and jurists searched for words to describe what had no precedence in history. The killing of prisoners of war was a violation of conventions, but the creation of an industry for the extermination of civilians required a new definition. Salaspils appeared in the indictment materials as proof of the systematic extermination of the peoples of Eastern Europe. This was not random violence, but part of the general Plan Ost, which envisioned the colonization of Eastern territories and the reduction of the local population to a level necessary to serve the German masters. The restoration of the names of the dead continues to this day. Historians, archivists, and volunteers work with documents, compare data, and search for relatives. This is a long and painstaking work. Every name returned from oblivion is a small victory over Nazism, which wanted to turn people into nameless dust. Books of remembrance published in Latvia, Russia, Belarus are supplemented with new pages. This is our duty to those who remained in the Salaspils land. As long as we remember their names, they continue to live in our memory. When the troops left the liberated camp, leaving it to the care of rear services and medics, they carried with them not only the joy of victory, but also the heavy burden of what they had seen. This experience changed an entire generation. People who returned from the war rarely liked to talk about the daily life on the front, but they spoke even less about the camps. It was too hard to find the words. Yet this silence was not oblivion, but a form of living through grief. Only years later, when the pain had somewhat subsided, did memoirs, films, and books emerge, attempting to comprehend this experience. Today, the territory of Salaspils is a vast field surrounded by forest. There are no reconstructed barracks. The creators of the memorial decided not to build sets. Only symbolic concrete structures mark the places where the barracks stood, and the path along which prisoners were driven. It is a space of emptiness that weighs heavily on one's shoulders. Walking along the main alley, one physically feels the weight of history. Here, one does not want to speak loudly. Laughter seems inappropriate. Nature gradually reclaims its own. Grass pushes through the concrete, trees approach the memorial's boundaries, but the place itself retains an aura of sorrow. The liberation of concentration camps became a turning point in human consciousness. It showed that evil can be mundane, bureaucratic, and utterly ruthless. But it also showed the strength of the human spirit, the capacity for compassion and self-sacrifice. Doctors who spent days by the bedsides of emaciated children soldiers who gave their rations to prisoners, local residents who brought clothes and food. All these were manifestations of that very humanity that Nazism tried to destroy, but could not. The light that ignited on the day of liberation dispelled the darkness, but the shadows of that darkness remained long and cold. At the end of our journey through these mournful places, we return once again to the sound of the metronome. It continues to beat, counting the seconds of eternity. Thump, thump, thump. This is not just the sound of a mechanism. It is the heartbeat of memory, synchronizing with the heart of everyone who comes here. We leave, return to our warm homes, to our families and concerns, but a part of us remains there, on that wind-swept field near Riga. We bear the responsibility to ensure that this sound never fades, that the silence of oblivion does not cover these graves. For as long as this thumping sounds, as long as we remember Salaspils, we have hope that such a thing will never happen again. This is our vow, our oath, and our eternal lesson, learned at the cost of millions of lives. History does not forgive unlearned lessons, and Salaspils is the strictest teacher, whose voice resonates with the rhythmic heartbeat from beneath the earth, reminding us of the value of every human life.